It often began on moonless nights, slow drum beats echoing across the empty streets, the sound rolling like distant thunder through towns that had long since surrendered to fear. Doors shut, candles dimmed, and families whispered prayers as the procession passed. To witness it was to feel the weight of the medieval world's deepest dread. A column of hooded men moving in absolute silence, their bodies already streaked with blood, their whips coiled in their hands like sleeping serpents. These were the flagellants, members of one of the most mysterious and troubling secret movements of the Middle Ages, a movement born from crisis and fueled by apocalyptic terror. The flagellants emerged during the 13th and 14th centuries, an era when Europe was staggering under poverty, famine, war, and, worst of all, the relentless shadow of the plague. At their core, they believed that humanity had invited divine wrath through sin, and that only extreme bodily suffering could atone for the moral decay of the world. To them, whipping the flesh was not an act of madness but purification, a living sacrifice to appease an angry God. Their rise is inseparable from the spiritual atmosphere of the time. Medieval Christianity was steeped in guilt, visions of hell, and a deeply intimate sense of divine judgment. People saw signs and omens everywhere: comets, blood-colored moons, earthquakes, and rumors of distant wars. For many, these were not natural events. They were warnings. In such a climate, the flagellants offered a terrifying but strangely comforting path, a way to confront divine punishment by embracing suffering before it arrived. Though some historians trace flagellant practices to earlier penitential traditions, the true movement began around 1250, when reports spread of men and women wandering Italy and Germany in self-punishing processions. According to legend, the very first group was led by a man who claimed to have seen an angel who commanded him to preach repentance through suffering. Whether this was a single charismatic leader or several unconnected preachers is uncertain. Secrecy and myth shroud the movement's beginnings, but by 1260, flagellant processions were sweeping across Europe. The church initially tolerated them. Clergy and commoners alike were impressed by the devotion of men who willingly shed their own blood. Some towns even welcomed the processions as living reminders of moral duty. But the church's support would not last. As the groups grew more radical, more secretive, and more independent, the Vatican saw a threat emerging, a challenge to official authority. One of the most striking aspects of the flagellants was the nocturnal procession. Traveling in groups of 50 to 300, they entered towns at dusk or after midnight. They walked barefoot, dressed in plain tunics with hoods that concealed their faces. Many wore a red cross sewn onto their clothing, symbolizing Christ's wounds, but the deeper symbolism was penitential secrecy. They wished to be seen as anonymous sinners, not individuals seeking praise. The silence of their marches was chilling. Medieval chroniclers described the processions as ghostly armies, moving like shadows across the land. Only when they reached a designated square, churchyard, or field did the ritual begin. A circle was formed. Torches were planted in the ground. A leader, often a layman, not a priest, stepped forward carrying a book of penitential hymns. At his command, the group fell to their knees, confessing sins aloud: greed, lust, envy, pride, lies, theft. Their voices rose into the cold night like a mournful storm. Then came the whipping. The flagellants carried multi-thonged lashes, often tipped with metal spikes or knots designed to tear the skin open. Many made their own whips in secrecy, believing that crafting the instrument of pain added spiritual weight to the act. When the leader shouted the first command, the men lifted their whips and brought them down on their backs in unison. A second command, and the pace increased. A third, and the frenzy began. Witnesses wrote of seeing blood spraying onto the ground, wounds opening like red mouths, and the men collapsing only to rise again with renewed fervor. Their chanting grew louder, some speaking in tongues, others crying out prophecies or visions. Many claimed to see angels or demons in the flames of the torches. Some prophesied the end of the world, predicting dates when Christ would return or when the final plague would strike. For them, pain dissolved the boundary between the earthly and the divine. In their agony, they believed they were closer to God than any priest or bishop. By the early 1300s, the flagellants had become a full-fledged underground movement. They traveled independently of church authority, refused the leadership of clergy, and formed their own rules. This was dangerous territory in medieval Europe. The church believed only ordained priests had the right to perform rituals of penance. But the flagellants saw themselves as chosen instruments of divine will, not beholden to human hierarchy. They claimed their rituals brought direct forgiveness from God, bypassing priests. The plague was divine punishment the church could not stop. Their visions and prophecies were inspired directly by heaven. The church had become corrupt and ineffective. Church officials quickly became alarmed. Pope Clement VI denounced the movement in 1349, declaring it heretical. Monks were forbidden from joining. Priests who supported the flagellants were threatened with excommunication. But by then, the movement had spread too far and too fast. Nothing accelerated the rise of the flagellants like the Black Death. When the plague arrived in Europe in 1347, it killed with a speed and violence never before seen. Whole villages died in days, corpses piled in streets, priests fled their parishes, medical knowledge failed, fear consumed the continent. Into this terror walked the flagellants. Their blood-soaked processions were seen by many as the last hope for salvation. People believed that if enough faithful men shed their blood, God might spare their town. Thousands joined the processions, abandoning homes and families. Groups of flagellants marched from city to city, declaring that each town needed exactly 33.5 days of whipping, symbolizing the years of Christ's life. But their arrival often brought chaos. They preached doom, criticized church authority, and spread radical ideas that frightened local officials. As they moved from region to region, they sometimes triggered mass hysteria. In some areas, their presence mistakenly led to increased blame on marginalized groups, fueling violence and persecution. Authorities soon saw them as a threat not only to religious stability, but also to social order. When the church banned their public processions, the flagellants retreated into secrecy. They met in abandoned barns, old chapels, secluded forests, and underground cellars. These gatherings often occurred at midnight, lit only by torches or moonlight. Their rituals grew even more intense and mystical. Some secret groups developed elaborate initiation ceremonies. New members were blindfolded, questioned, and required to confess sins in complete darkness. They were then whipped by the group leader to break the old self. Only after enduring a night of punishment could they join the procession. These underground gatherings created a bond stronger than ordinary religious groups. Shared suffering, secrecy, and the presence of death created a form of brotherhood that felt sacred, unbreakable, and divine. As the movement became more clandestine, mystical experiences increased. Many flagellants claimed to receive visions from angels predicting the future. Others fell into trances during the whipping, describing vivid journeys to heaven or hell. Chroniclers recorded predictions of a coming cosmic fire, visions of Christ bleeding from the sky, angels measuring the sins of nations, warnings that the world would end within the century. These prophecies only strengthened their identity as chosen penitents fighting to save the world. By the late 14th century, the flagellant movement began to fracture. The plague receded, church authorities cracked down harder, and local rulers used force to break up gatherings. Without the apocalyptic pressure that had fueled them, the processions dwindled. By 1400, only scattered groups remained, and by the 15th century, the flagellants had almost entirely disappeared, surviving only as dark folklore and occasional local penitential practices. But their legacy lingered. Modern historians view the flagellants as a window into the medieval psyche. a reminder of how fear, religion, and desperation can fuse into powerful collective movements. To some, they represent a mass trauma response, a society overwhelmed by catastrophe seeking meaning through pain. To others, they were a protest against church authority, a sign of growing spiritual independence among the common people. Their secrecy, rituals, symbols, and visions link them to broader traditions of medieval mysticism. In many ways, they were both a warning and a prophecy themselves, a glimpse of the fragility of social order when the world seems to be ending. Even today, stories of hooded penitents marching in the night survive in European folklore, blending history with shadows. The image of their torchlit processions, bloody, silent, and driven by a raw spiritual desperation, remains one of the most haunting symbols of the medieval age.